Mississippi, 1891. 3 Rottweilers were released into the darkness to hunt down a 12-year-old enslaved girl named Amelia. These weren't ordinary dogs. They were trained killers, each weighing over 100 pounds, fed raw meat and kept hungry. Their names were Brutus, Caesar, and Nero, and they never failed. The plantation owner expected them back in an hour, maybe 2, dragging what was left of the child. Their overseer, Cyrus Gan, smiled as he released them. He had done this before. He enjoyed it. But 8 hours passed. Then the sun rose, and when the dogs finally returned, they came back alone. No blood on their jaws, no torn fabric in their teeth. Just 3 confused animals that had somehow lost a barefoot 12-year-old girl in terrain they knew better than she did. What happened in those 8 hours would expose a secret so devastating it would shake the foundation of everything they thought they knew. Because Amelia wasn't just running for her life. She was running from a place that wasn't supposed to exist. A plantation where 43 people lived as slaves in 1891. That was 26 years after slavery ended in America. 26 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. 26 years after the war that was supposed to have freed them all. But on the Thornhill Plantation, deep in the backwoods of rural Mississippi, no one told the enslaved people that freedom had come. And the girl who discovered the truth would become the key to exposing one of the most horrifying secrets of the Reconstruction era. This is the story of Amelia, a girl who wasn't supposed to exist, who escaped dogs that never failed, and who refused to accept that her chains were permanent. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from. And if this is your first time on our channel, don't forget to subscribe. Because we uncover the stories that official history tried to bury. The stories of those who refused to stay silent. The Thornhill Plantation sat deep in the backwoods of Mississippi, miles from any town, hidden behind thick forests and swampland that seemed to swallow all sound. The nearest road was 15 miles away. The nearest sheriff was paid to look the other way. Mail never came. Visitors never arrived. And the people who lived there had no idea that the outside world had changed. The plantation stretched across 800 acres of land that Thomas Thornhill's father had inherited before the war. The main house, a 2-story structure with peeling white paint, sat on a hill overlooking the fields. Behind it, a cluster of wooden shacks housed the 43 people who worked the land from sunrise to sunset, believing they had no choice, believing escape meant death, believing because that's what they were told every single day. Thomas Thornhill was 52 years old in 1891. He was a large man, with a red face, gray hair, and hands that had never done a day's real work. His father had died in 1872, leaving him the plantation and a simple instruction. Keep them working, keep them isolated, keep them ignorant. And Thomas had followed those instructions for nearly 20 years. He had learned early that fear was more effective than chains, fear that the world beyond the trees was dangerous, fear that running meant being torn apart by dogs, fear that speaking the truth meant punishment so severe that others would learn from your example. The people on Thornhill Plantation didn't know that the Civil War had ended in 1865. They didn't know about the Emancipation Proclamation. They didn't know that in cities just 2 days' walk away, black people lived as free men and women, working for wages, owning property, voting in elections. They had been deliberately kept in a bubble of ignorance and fear. If Thomas Thornhill was the architect of this nightmare, Cyrus Gan was its enforcer. Cyrus was 34 years old, tall and lean with cold blue eyes and a smile that appeared when he hurt people. He had been overseeing the plantation for 9 years, hired because Thomas recognized something useful in him. Cyrus enjoyed control. He enjoyed watching people flinch when he walked by. He enjoyed the power that came from being feared. Cyrus kept order through a combination of violence and psychological terror. Public whippings for minor infractions. Days without food for those who worked too slowly. And for those who tried to run, there were the dogs. Brutus, Caesar, and Nero lived in an iron pen behind the main house. 3 Rottweilers, each bred and trained specifically for hunting human beings. Cyrus had raised them from puppies, feeding them raw meat, keeping them hungry enough to be aggressive, but controlled enough to obey commands. He had trained them using old clothes soaked in human scent, teaching them to track and corner, to bark, but not to kill, unless ordered. In 9 years, 4 people had tried to escape. The dogs had caught all of them. Cyrus made sure the captured runaways were punished publicly, ensuring everyone understood what happened when you tried to leave. Amelia was born in 1879 on the Thornhill Plantation. That was 14 years after the 13th Amendment abolished slavery. But she didn't know that. No one did. Her mother, Grace, died during childbirth. complications that could have been treated by a real doctor. But Thomas Thornhill didn't believe in wasting money on medical care for his property. Her father, whose name was Daniel, was sold away to a neighboring farm when Amelia was just 6 months old. She never knew him. Amelia was raised by an elderly woman named Ruth, who had been enslaved since childhood and was now too old to work the fields. Ruth was 68 years old, with silver hair, deep wrinkles, and eyes that had seen too much suffering. She had survived by learning to be invisible, by keeping her head down, by never challenging the system that had defined her entire life. But Ruth knew things she had learned before Thomas Thornhill's father had isolated the plantation. She remembered a time when news traveled, when people spoke in whispers about a war in the North, about a president who declared freedom, about soldiers in blue uniforms who promised liberation. Ruth never spoke these things openly. Speaking such words could get you killed. But during the long nights when she and Amelia sat together in their small shack, she would whisper stories. Stories about a world beyond the trees where black people lived free. Stories about a war that was supposed to have ended slavery. Stories that planted a dangerous seed in Amelia's young mind. A question that grew louder every year. If we're free, why are we still here? By the time Amelia was 12, she worked in the main house. She scrubbed floors, carried water, served meals while being told she was lucky to eat scraps. She learned to make herself invisible, to avoid eye contact with Thomas and Cyrus, to move through rooms without making noise. She had Ruth's sharp eyes and quick mind. She noticed things. The way Thomas would occasionally mention years, dates that didn't make sense if the war was still happening. The way traveling merchants who occasionally stopped by would look confused when they saw the plantation's operations. The way Cyrus would quickly redirect conversations when outsiders asked too many questions. And she noticed the scars. Ruth's back was covered in thick, raised scars from decades of whippings. Most of the older workers bore similar marks. But the younger ones, those born on the plantation in the years after the war, had fewer scars. As if the violence had decreased over time. As if Thomas had realized he didn't need the whip as much when fear and ignorance did the work for him. Inside Amelia, something burned. A rage that she couldn't fully name but couldn't extinguish. Ruth had planted it with her whispered stories, and now it grew every day, fed by the injustice she witnessed, by the chains she couldn't see but could feel in every moment of her existence. On the night of October 14th, 1891, that rage would finally push Amelia to make a choice that would change everything. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday evening. Amelia was serving dinner in the main house, carrying plates from the kitchen to the dining room where Thomas and Cyrus ate together, discussing the next day's work assignments. She was supposed to be invisible, silent, careful. But as she set a plate in front of Thomas, she heard him say something that made her hand freeze. The new century's coming in 9 years, can you believe it? 1900. Feels like just yesterday it was 1865. 1865. The year Ruth said the war ended. The year freedom was supposed to have come. Amelia's hand trembled. The plate rattled slightly against the table. Cyrus noticed. "Girl, you breaking something?" "No, sir," Amelia whispered. "Sorry, sir." But her mind was racing. 1891. 26 years since 1865. 26 years since the war Ruth spoke about. 26 years since freedom was supposed to have arrived. They had been lied to. For her entire life. For Ruth's entire life since the war. They had been kept here, working without pay, living in fear, believing they had no choice. And the truth was that they had been free all along. That night, Amelia couldn't sleep. She lay on her thin pallet in the shack she shared with Ruth and 3 other women, staring at the ceiling, feeling the truth settle over her like a weight. We've been free. We've been free this whole time. The rage that had been building for years suddenly crystallized into something else. Determination. Amelia waited until just after midnight. The moon was barely a sliver, offering almost no light. The darkness was so thick she couldn't see her own hands in front of her face. She wore the thin cotton dress she worked in, and nothing else. No shoes, no food, no blanket. Taking anything would have meant going to the main house or the storage shed, risking noise, risking discovery. She slipped out of the shack silently. Ruth was awake. Amelia could tell by the way her breathing changed. But Ruth said nothing, just watched as the girl she had raised disappeared into the darkness. Amelia headed east. Ruth had told her once, years ago, that east led to the river, and the river led to towns where black people lived free. Ruth said it was 2 days on foot if you knew the way. Amelia didn't know the way. But she ran anyway. She ran because staying meant dying slowly, suffocating under the weight of a lie. Running meant maybe dying fast. But at least it meant choosing. At least it meant trying. The night air was cool against her skin. Her feet, bare and soft from years of indoor work, immediately began to hurt as they struck roots and rocks. But she didn't slow down. She ran with a desperation born from 12 years of accumulated rage, from Ruth's whispered stories, from the knowledge that she had been robbed of freedom for her entire life. Behind her, back at the plantation, one of the women woke to use the outhouse. She noticed Amelia's empty pallet. She checked the main house. She checked the kitchen. Then she did what fear made her do, what years of conditioning demanded she do. She woke the overseer. Cyrus Gan opened his eyes and smiled. Cyrus walked slowly to the dog pen, taking his time, savoring the moment. This was what he lived for. The hunt, the chase, the inevitable capture. In 9 years, 4 people had tried to run. The dogs had caught all of them within 6 hours. A 12-year-old girl with bare feet and no survival skills. This would be over in 2 hours, maybe less. Brutus, Caesar, and Nero stood behind the iron gate, already alert. They could sense something was happening. Their eyes gleamed in the darkness, reflecting the lamplight Cyrus carried. He went back to Amelia's shack and grabbed her blanket from her pallet. The thin fabric still carried her scent, sweat, and soap, and the faint smell of the herbs she had been grinding in the kitchen that evening. Cyrus brought the blanket to the pen and held it through the bars. The dogs pressed their massive heads against it, sniffing deeply, their nostrils flaring. Their eyes locked onto the scent, with the focus of predators who had found prey. Cyrus opened the gate. "Find her," he said. The 3 Rottweilers bolted into the night like released bullets, their powerful legs eating up ground, their noses already tracking the scent trail Amelia had left just 20 minutes earlier. Cyrus watched them disappear into the darkness. Then he went back to his room, poured himself a drink, and sat by the window. By dawn, the dogs would return with the girl. He'd make sure her punishment was public. Make sure everyone understood what happened when you tried to leave. He closed his eyes and waited. 12 o'clock to 1:30. The first pursuit. Amelia heard them before she saw them. The barking started distant at first, 3 distinct voices echoing through the forest, then closer. And so close she could hear their paws hammering the earth, hear their heavy breathing as they ran. Terror flooded her body like ice water. She had seen what these dogs could do. She had seen the scars on the last person who tried to run, the deep gouges on his legs and arms where their teeth had torn through flesh. She ran faster. Branches tore at her face and arms. Thorns ripped her feet. Blood began to leave a trail on the ground, making the dog's job even easier. She couldn't see where she was going. The darkness swallowed everything. She tripped over roots and rocks, fell, got up, kept running. The barking got louder. They were gaining. They were built for this, bred for this. She was a 12-year-old girl who had spent most of her life indoors. Then she saw it, a glimmer in the darkness. Water. A creek, maybe 15 feet wide. The water moving fast, reflecting what little moonlight penetrated the thick canopy. Ruth had told her once, "Water can hide your scent. If dogs are chasing you, get into water." Amelia didn't hesitate. She jumped. The water was shockingly cold. The current immediately grabbed her, pulling her downstream. Amelia's dress soaked through, became heavy, dragging her down. She grabbed onto a large rock jutting from the creek bed and held on, her arms shaking with effort. The water came up to her chest. The cold was numbing her fingers, making it hard to maintain her grip. But she held on and listened. The barking stopped. For a moment, there was only the sound of the creek rushing past and her own heartbeat pounding in her ears like a drum. She waited. She didn't move. She barely breathed. Then she heard it, sniffing. The dogs were at the edge of the creek just upstream, maybe 20 yards away. Their dark shapes moved back and forth along the bank, their heads down, trying to pick up the scent again. Water was confusing them. The scent trail ended at the creek's edge, and they couldn't figure out where she'd gone. Amelia slipped deeper into the water, letting the current carry her farther downstream. She kept her head just above the surface, her body horizontal, using the rock formations to guide herself without fighting the flow. The cold was becoming dangerous. She couldn't feel her feet anymore. Her hands were so numb she could barely tell if she was still holding onto the rocks she used to control her movement. But she kept going. Behind her, she heard splashing, The dogs had entered the water. They were coming downstream, following the creek because they had no other option. Amelia pulled herself out onto the opposite bank and ran again. Her dress clung to her body. Every step felt like dragging stones. Her legs were cramping. Her lungs burned. Her feet, already torn and bleeding, now screamed with pain from the cold and the sharp rocks in the creek bed. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The dogs found the scent again. Their barking resumed, now with a new intensity, as if they were frustrated by the delay, as if they were angry. Amelia ran for another hour, maybe more. Time disappeared. It was only the running and the sound of the dogs getting closer again, and the certain knowledge that she couldn't keep this pace up much longer. Her body was failing. Her legs were shaking. She was leaving blood with every step. The dogs would follow that trail easily. She didn't know where she was. The trees all looked the same. The darkness swallowed everything. She was lost in a forest she had never explored, running from dogs that knew every inch of this terrain. She was going to die out here. She knew it, but at least she had chosen. At least she had tried. Then, through the trees, she saw it. The cabin. The cabin sat in a small clearing, half collapsed, covered in vines and moss. The roof had caved in on one side. The door hung off its hinges, barely attached to the frame. The windows were broken, their glass long gone, leaving empty holes like dead eyes. It looked abandoned. It looked like it had been abandoned for years, maybe decades. Amelia didn't care. She ran toward it like it was salvation itself. She crashed through the broken door and immediately pulled it shut behind her, pressing her back against the wall. Her chest heaved. Her whole body shook. Sweat and creek water dripped from her hair. The barking was close now, maybe 50 yards away, maybe less. Amelia looked around the cabin. There was nothing inside. No furniture, no tools, just dirt and rotting wood and shadows that seemed to move in the corners. Moonlight filtered through the collapsed section of roof, creating patches of dim illumination that somehow made the darkness seem deeper. She crawled into the corner farthest from the door and curled into a ball, making herself as small as possible. She closed her eyes. She prayed for the first time in years, whispering words she had heard Ruth say, asking God for mercy, for protection, for a miracle. She didn't know if God listened to girls like her, but she prayed anyway. The barking stopped again. She heard the dogs outside. She heard their claws scraping against the wooden walls of the cabin. She heard them sniffing at the gaps in the door, their hot breath pushing through the cracks. She held her breath. Then one of them barked, a sharp, vicious sound that echoed in the small space. They had found her. The door exploded inward. Brutus came through first, his massive body filling the doorway, his teeth bared, his eyes wild with the excitement of a successful hunt. Caesar and Nero followed immediately behind him, 300 pounds of muscle and teeth filling the small cabin with snarling and snapping. Amelia screamed. She pressed herself into the corner, her hands up to protect her face. There was nowhere to go. The cabin was one small room. The dogs were between her and the only exit. Brutus lunged. His front paws left the ground. His jaws opened wide. Amelia could see every tooth, could see the strings of saliva connecting his upper and lower jaws. Then the floor gave way. The rotted wood, weakened by years of rain and decay, couldn't support the combined weight of 3 massive dogs and a 12-year-old girl. The board splintered with a sound like gunshots. Amelia fell. She dropped through darkness, the world spinning, her stomach lurching. She hit the ground hard. The impact knocked every bit of air from her lungs. She gasped and coughed and tried to understand where she was, tried to make her body respond to commands. Above her, she could hear the dogs barking and clawing at the hole she had fallen through. Their massive heads appeared in the opening, snapping and snarling. But they didn't follow. The hole was too small. Their bodies were too large. They couldn't fit through the gap in the floor. Amelia was in a cellar. It was pitch black. She couldn't see anything. She felt around with her hands, trying to understand the space. The walls were dirt. The floor was dirt. It smelled like mold and decay and things that had died down here long ago. But it was deep, maybe 10 feet down. The dogs couldn't reach her. She sat there in the dark, shaking, listening to the dogs rage above her, slowly realizing that she was safe. For now, for this moment. Hours passed. The dogs didn't leave. They stayed at the edge of the hole, barking and growling, occasionally trying to dig through the floor to reach her. She could hear wood splintering above, could hear their claws scraping against the remaining boards. But they couldn't get to her. Amelia's body ached everywhere. Her feet were bleeding heavily now. The cold from the creek had settled deep into her bones. Her dress was still wet, making her shiver uncontrollably in the darkness of the cellar. She wrapped her arms around herself and waited. She didn't know what else to do. The darkness was complete. She had never experienced darkness like this. Even on the plantation, there was always some light, stars or moon, or the distant glow of lamps from the main house. But here, buried underground, there was nothing. She couldn't see her own hands when she held them inches from her face. Time became meaningless. Minutes felt like hours. She might have been down there for 2 hours or 6. She had no way to know. Then the barking changed. It got quieter, uncertain. The dogs were sniffing at something. She heard them move away from the hole, heard their claws on the cabin floor. They were distracted by something. Amelia didn't move. She didn't trust it. She stayed in the cellar, breathing as quietly as she could, waiting for the trap to spring, waiting for Cyrus to appear with a rope to pull her out. Minutes passed. The barking stopped completely. Silence. Amelia didn't move. She didn't trust it. Experience had taught her that hope was dangerous, that the moment you relaxed, the moment you believed things might be okay, that's when they got worse. She stayed in the cellar, breathing quietly, listening to nothing. Then she heard a voice. Girl. It was a woman's voice, old, rough, weathered by years. It came from above, from somewhere inside the cabin. Girl, you down there? Amelia didn't answer. She didn't know if it was a trick, if this was Cyrus or Thomas using someone to draw her out. I ain't going to hurt you. Them dogs is gone. You can come up now. Amelia's throat was too dry to speak. She swallowed hard, trying to generate saliva. Who are you? She whispered. Someone who ain't supposed to be here neither. Come on up, I got water. Amelia hesitated. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, that no one helped runaways, that kindness was just another form of control. But she was trapped anyway. If this was Cyrus or someone working for him, they could just wait for her to die of thirst down here. Coming up couldn't make her situation worse. She reached up and found a piece of wood sticking out from the dirt wall. She used it to pull herself up, her arms shaking with exhaustion. She climbed slowly, carefully, until she could see through the hole. A face looked down at her. An old black woman with silver hair pulled back tight, deep lines around her eyes and mouth, skin the color of mahogany darkened by decades in the sun. She had to be 70, maybe older. She wore a simple dress made from rough fabric, patched in several places. She reached down and helped pull Amelia out of the cellar. Amelia stood on shaking legs, looking around the cabin in the dim morning light that filtered through the broken roof. The dogs were gone. The woman stood in front of her, holding a dented tin cup. Drink, the woman said. Amelia took the cup and drank. The water was warm, probably from sitting out, but it was the best thing she had ever tasted. She drank until the cup was empty, then gasped for air. Where did the dogs go? Amelia asked. The woman smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was sad and knowing, a smile of someone who had seen too much and learned too well. I sent them away, she said. How? Same way I've been sending away everything that comes looking for me. I know things that scare dogs, things that scare men too. Amelia stared at her, trying to understand. Who are you? My name is Esther, the woman said. I've been living in these woods for near about 40 years. I was enslaved once, a long time ago. I ran. They sent dogs after me too. She gestured to the cabin around them. But I learned how to survive. I learned how to hide. And I learned how to fight back in ways they don't understand. My grandmother, she was born in Africa. Brought here on a ship when she was just a girl. She taught me things before she died. Root magic, plant knowledge, ways to use what grows in the earth to heal or harm or confuse. Esther knelt down and showed Amelia a small bundle of dried herbs hanging from her belt. Certain plants, when you burn them, create smoke that dogs hate. Makes them confused, scared. They ran off soon as they smelled it. They'll go back to the plantation, but they won't remember which way they went. Won't be able to lead anyone back here. Amelia's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the floor. Are they coming back? She asked. The men? Esther's expression darkened. The dogs? No. I put something in the air they don't like. But the men, they're going to come eventually. They always do. When the dogs come back without you, they'll want to know why. They'll come looking. What do I do? Esther sat down in front of her, her movements slow and careful, the movements of someone whose body had been broken and healed wrong many times over. You rest, Esther said. Then you keep running. But this time, you run smart. I'll show you the way. Amelia slept for 2 hours on the dirt floor of that broken cabin, her body finally giving in to exhaustion. When she woke, dawn was breaking through the cracks in the walls, painting everything in shades of gray and gold. Esther sat near the door, watching the tree line. She had a knife in her hand, old and rusted, but sharp. They'll come soon, Esther said without turning around. The dogs went back. The men will want to know why they came back without you. Amelia sat up. Her body screamed with pain. Every muscle was tight. Her feet were swollen and crusted with dried blood. She looked down at them and felt tears coming. She pushed them back down. How far is the river? Amelia asked. 2 days if you move fast, 3 if you don't. But you ain't going to the river. Amelia looked at her. Why not? Because they know that's where runaways go. They'll have men waiting there. You go to the river, you get caught. Or worse. Then where do I go? Esther finally turned to look at her. Her eyes were hard, but not unkind. North. There's a settlement about 4 days from here. Free black folks. They don't ask questions. They don't turn people away. But the path is rough. Swampland, gators, snakes. Most people don't make it. Most people don't make it here either, Amelia said. Esther smiled a little. You got some fire in you. Good. You'll need it. Subscribe to discover how a 12-year-old girl with nothing but determination would cross 4 days of deadly swampland to reach freedom, and how her escape would expose a secret that would shake the entire South. Esther stood and walked to the corner of the cabin. She moved some loose boards and pulled out a small sack made from rough cloth. Inside was dried meat, a piece of hard bread, and a tin of water. She handed it to Amelia. This will get you through 2 days, if you're careful. After that, you got to find food yourself. You know what plants you can eat? Amelia shook her head. Esther sighed. Then you're going to learn fast, or you're going to starve. She knelt down next to Amelia and started wrapping her feet with strips of cloth torn from an old blanket. The cloth was rough, but it was better than nothing. Better than walking on raw, bleeding flesh. Why are you helping me? Amelia asked. Esther didn't answer right away. She tied off the cloth and sat back. Because somebody helped me once. Long time ago. Old woman living alone in a cabin, not much different from this one. She gave me food, showed me which way to go, told me how to survive, and I swore if I ever got the chance, I'd do the same. That's all. She stood up and walked back to the door. You need to go now. They're coming. I can feel it. Amelia stood. Her legs still shook, but they held her. She took the sack and slung it over her shoulder. What about you? I'll be fine. I always am. Amelia walked to the door. She stopped and looked back at Esther. Thank you. Esther nodded. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you make it. Amelia stepped out of the cabin and into the woods. The morning air was cool. Birds were starting to sing. For a moment, it almost felt peaceful. Then she heard it. Voices. Men's voices. They were far away, but getting closer. She ran. Esther watched her disappear into the trees. Then she turned and walked back into the cabin. She sat down in the center of the room and waited. She had done this before. She knew what was coming. 15 minutes later, Cyrus Gan arrived with 5 other men. They had guns and torches, even though it was daylight, as if they expected to need them, as if they were hunting something more dangerous than a 12-year-old girl. They surrounded the cabin. Cyrus kicked the door open and stepped inside. He saw Esther sitting there, calm as anything. Where is she? He demanded. Where's who? Esther asked. Cyrus raised his rifle and pointed it at her face. The girl. The dogs tracked her here. Where is she? Esther looked at him like he was a child throwing a tantrum. Ain't no girl here. Just me. And I've been here alone for years. Your dogs must have lost the scent. Cyrus looked around the cabin. He saw the hole in the floor. He walked over and looked down into the cellar. It was empty. He turned back to Esther. You're lying. Believe what you want. Don't make it true. One of the other men stepped forward. Cyrus, we're wasting time. The girl's long gone. Let's go. Cyrus stared at Esther for a long moment. Then he lowered his rifle. If I find out you helped her, I'll come back, and I won't be kind. Esther said nothing. Cyrus and his men left. Esther listened to their footsteps fade into the distance. Then she stood up, grabbed her knife, and walked out the back of the cabin. She had her own running to do now. Amelia moved through the woods as fast as her broken feet would let her. The cloth wrappings helped, but every step still hurt. She followed the direction Esther had pointed her toward. North, toward the swamp, toward something that might be freedom or might be death. By midday, the trees started to change. They grew thicker, darker. The ground became soft and wet. She could smell the swamp before she saw it. It smelled like rot and standing water and things that had died a long time ago. She stopped at the edge and stared. The swamp stretched out in front of her like a black mirror. Trees rose out of the water, their roots twisted and gnarled. Moss hung from the branches like old curtains. The water was still. Too still. She knew what that meant. Gators. She had two choices. Go through the swamp or go around it. Going around would take days. Days she didn't have. Days that would give Cyrus and his men time to catch up. Amelia stepped into the water. It was warm, warmer than the creek had been. That was somehow worse. The warmth meant things lived in it, things that thrived in this environment. The water came up to her knees, then her waist, then her chest. The bottom was soft mud that sucked at her feet with every step. Each time she lifted her foot, she had to fight against the suction, and each time she put it down, she had no idea what she was stepping on. Roots, rocks, or something alive. She kept her arms above the water and moved slowly. She didn't want to make noise, didn't want to create ripples that would attract attention. Esther had told her that gators were attracted to movement, to splashing, to anything that suggested prey struggling. So she moved like a ghost. Slow, deliberate, trying to keep her breathing quiet, even though her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Something brushed against her leg. Amelia froze. She looked down but couldn't see through the dark water. The surface was covered with a thin layer of algae and plant matter that made it impossible to see what lay beneath. She waited, her muscles locked in place, her body screaming at her to run, to get out, to move. But she knew running would be worse. Running would create splashing. Splashing would bring the gators. The thing moved away. Amelia started moving again, even slower than before. Each step took 10 seconds. Lift the foot slowly from the mud. Move it forward through the water without breaking the surface. Lower it carefully. Feel for solid ground. Shift weight. Repeat. It took her 3 hours to cross what was probably only 200 yards of swamp. When she finally pulled herself onto dry land on the other side, she collapsed. Her whole body was shaking. The cloth wrappings on her feet had come loose and floated away somewhere in the water. Her dress was covered in mud and slime and things she didn't want to identify. She smelled like death. She lay there for a long time. The sun was setting. She knew she needed to move, knew she needed to find shelter before dark, but her body wouldn't respond. She was so tired, so hungry, so broken. Then she heard something. Footsteps. Amelia forced herself to sit up. A figure emerged from the trees. A man. He was black, tall, maybe in his 20s. He carried a rifle. Amelia's heart sank. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't work. If this was someone from Thornhill, if this was someone sent to catch her, she was done. She had nothing left to run with. The man stopped a few feet away from her. He looked her up and down, taking in her torn dress, her bloody feet, her mud-covered body. "You running?" he asked. Amelia didn't answer. She didn't know if she could trust him. "It's all right," he said. "I ain't going to hurt you. I'm running too." He lowered his rifle and set it on the ground. Then he sat down across from her, keeping his distance, showing he wasn't a threat. "My name's Marcus. I've been free for 6 months now. I'm heading north to the settlement. You headed that way too?" Amelia nodded slowly. "How far?" she asked. 3 more days if we move steady. Less if we push hard. But you look like you ain't got much push left in you." "I'll make it," Amelia said. Marcus studied her face. He saw something there. The same thing he had seen in his own reflection 6 months ago when he had made his own escape. Determination forged in suffering, the kind of strength that came from having nothing left to lose. He reached into his pack and pulled out a piece of dried fish. He handed it to her. "Eat. You ain't going to make it anywhere on an empty stomach." Amelia took the fish and ate. It was salty and tough, but it was food, real food. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, feeling strength return to her body with each swallow. Where'd you come from? Marcus asked. Thornhill Plantation? Marcus's face changed. He looked surprised, then angry. Thornhill. That place is supposed to be abandoned. Everybody knows the war freed the slaves 30 years ago. Not there, Amelia said. Nobody told us. Nobody came. We didn't know. Marcus stared at her. For a moment, he didn't speak. He just looked at this 12-year-old girl covered in mud and blood, and something broke inside him. How many people still there? He finally asked. 43. Maybe less now. People die. They don't get replaced. Marcus stood up. He paced back and forth. He looked like he wanted to break something. That son of a... He stopped himself. He took a deep breath. We got to tell somebody. When we get to the settlement, we got to tell somebody. They won't believe us, Amelia said. Nobody ever believes us. They will, because I'll make them. Amelia looked at him. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that someone would care. But she had learned a long time ago that wanting something didn't make it true. Marcus sat back down. We'll rest here tonight. Move at first light. I'll keep watch. You sleep. I can't sleep, Amelia said. Every time I close my eyes, I hear the dogs. The dogs are gone. They always come back. Marcus didn't argue with her. He just nodded. Then we'll stay awake together. They sat in silence as the sun disappeared and the darkness came. The woods filled with sounds. Crickets, frogs, owls, things rustling in the bushes. Amelia jumped at every noise. Marcus stayed calm. He had been doing this longer than her. He knew which sounds mattered and which didn't. Around midnight, Aunt Marcus spoke. You got family back there? No, they're all gone. Dead or sold, I don't know which. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'm out now. That's all that matters. Marcus looked at her. You're strong. Stronger than most people I've met. You're going to make it. You don't know that. Yeah, I do. Amelia didn't respond. She pulled her knees to her chest and stared into the darkness. Somewhere out there, Cyrus and his men were looking for her. Somewhere out there, the dogs were resting, waiting to be sent out again. Somewhere out there, 42 people were still living in chains, believing that's all there was. She thought about Ruth. She wondered if Ruth knew she had run. She wondered if Ruth was proud or terrified or both. She wondered if she would ever see her again. She didn't let herself cry. Crying didn't help. It just made you weak. And she couldn't afford to be weak. Not now. Not ever. As the night wore on, exhaustion finally won. Amelia's eyes closed. She slept sitting up, her head resting on her knees. She dreamed of dogs with red eyes, and men with guns, and a river she could never reach. When she woke, Marcus was shaking her shoulder. We got to go, he said. Now. What's wrong? I heard voices, about a mile back. They're coming this way. Amelia stood. Her feet screamed. She ignored them. How many? Don't know. At least 3, maybe more. They grabbed their things and started moving fast. The sun was just starting to rise. The woods were gray and shadowy, that in-between time when darkness hadn't quite left, but light hadn't fully arrived. They moved north, pushing through thick brush and over fallen trees. Behind them, the voices got louder. There, I see tracks. This way. Amelia and Marcus ran. Her feet were bleeding again. Every step left a red mark on the ground. She knew they could follow that. She knew they were leaving a trail. But there was nothing she could do about it. They came to a ravine. It was deep and narrow, maybe 20 feet from top to bottom, with steep sides. A small stream ran at the bottom, the water clear and fast. Marcus looked at Amelia. We got to jump. I can't. Yes, you can. On 3. 1, 2, 3. They jumped. That Amelia hit the ground hard and rolled. Pain shot through her ankle like lightning. She bit down on her tongue to keep from screaming, tasting blood. Marcus landed next to her and immediately pulled her to her feet. Keep moving. They stumbled along the bottom of the ravine, splashing through the stream. The water was cold. It felt good on Amelia's burning feet. They moved as fast as they could, but Amelia was slowing down. Her ankle was swelling. She was limping badly. Behind them, they heard the men reach the edge of the ravine. They went down there. Go around. Cut them off. Marcus cursed under his breath. He looked at Amelia. Can you climb? She looked at the steep walls of the ravine. Wet rock, loose dirt, tree roots sticking out. I don't know. Try. They found a spot where the wall was slightly less steep. Marcus climbed up first, then reached down to pull Amelia up. She grabbed his hand and tried to climb. Her feet slipped on the wet rocks. She fell back down. She tried again. This time she made it halfway up before her ankle gave out. Yet she fell again. The voices were getting closer. "I can't," Amelia said. "Go without me." "No, you have to. Tell them about Thornhill. Tell them what's happening. Make them listen." Marcus climbed back down into the ravine. He grabbed Amelia by the shoulders. "I ain't leaving you. We both make it or neither of us does. Now get up." Amelia looked into his eyes. She saw something there she hadn't seen in a long time. Determination, hope, belief. She got up. Marcus helped her climb. It was slow, painful, but they made it to the top. They pulled themselves over the edge and kept running. The voices behind them were close now, so close she could hear individual words. "I see them. Don't let them get away." A gunshot rang out. The bullet hit a tree next to Amelia's head. Bark exploded. She ducked and kept running. Another shot. This one went wide. They were firing blind, shooting at movement through the trees. Then they broke through the tree line. In front of them was a clearing, and in the clearing were houses. Real houses with smoke coming from chimneys. People were outside, working in gardens, hanging laundry. They stopped what they were doing and stared. Amelia and Marcus stumbled into the clearing. Behind them, the men burst through the trees. 3 of them, breathing hard, rifles raised. They saw the settlement and stopped. One of them raised his rifle. "Those 2 are runaways. They're our property." An old man stepped forward from the crowd. He was black, with white hair and a beard. He walked with a cane, but his voice was strong. "Ain't no property here, just free people, and you're trespassing. You got a right to leave, right now, before I get my rifle." More people stepped forward, men and women. Some held tools, some held guns. They formed a line between the 3 men and Amelia and Marcus. The 3 men looked at each other. They were outnumbered. They knew it. "This ain't over," one of them said. "Yes, it is," the old man replied. The 3 men backed away slowly. Then they turned and disappeared into the woods. Amelia's legs finally gave out completely. She fell to the ground. Marcus knelt beside her. The old man walked over and looked down at them. "Where y'all come from?" "Thornhill Plantation," Marcus said. "And there's 40 more people still there who need help." The old man's face went hard. "Thornhill, that place is supposed to be gone." "It ain't. And they're keeping people enslaved, pretending the war never happened, pretending freedom never came." The crowd murmured. Voices rose in anger and disbelief. The old man looked at Amelia. "That true, girl?" Amelia nodded. She couldn't speak. She was too exhausted, too broken. The old man turned to the crowd. "Get the sheriff. Get the federal marshal. We're ending this today." 2 days later, Amelia sat on the porch of a small house in the settlement. Her feet were bandaged properly now. A woman named Clara had washed her wounds with soap and warm water, applied salve, and wrapped them in clean white cloth. Clara had also given her a new dress. Blue cotton with small yellow flowers. It was the first new thing Amelia had ever owned. She watched the road. She had been watching it since dawn. Marcus sat next to her. He was watching too. "They'll come," he said. The marshal gave his word. "Words don't mean much," Amelia replied. "These ones do, I made sure of it." The old man who had saved them was named Samuel. He had been born enslaved in Alabama. He escaped when he was 16 and made it north. After the war ended, he came back south and helped build the settlement. He called it New Hope. 40 families lived here now. They farmed. They built. They lived free. Samuel had sent word to the federal marshal in Jackson. He told him about Thornhill Plantation, about the people still enslaved there, about the laws being broken. The marshal had promised to investigate. The promises were easy. Action was hard. Amelia didn't let herself believe anything would change. She had learned not to hope too much. Hope hurt worse than anything when it got taken away. But then she saw them, a group of men on horses coming down the road, at least 20 of them. The federal marshal rode in front. He wore a dark suit and a badge on his chest. Behind him were deputies and soldiers. They carried rifles and official papers. Samuel walked out to meet them. Amelia and Marcus followed. "You Samuel?" the marshal asked. "I am. I'm Marshal Clayton. Got your message. I'm here to investigate these claims about Thornhill Plantation." "Ain't claims," Samuel said. "It's truth. And I got 2 witnesses right here who can prove it. Marshal Clayton looked at Amelia and Marcus. His eyes lingered on Amelia. She was just a child, thin, scarred, her eyes older than they should be. "You're from Thornhill?" he asked her. "Yes, sir." "And you say people are still being held there as slaves?" "Yes, sir. 42 of them, maybe 41 now if they punished anyone for me running." The marshal's jaw tightened. He turned to his men. "Mount up. We ride now." "I'm coming with you," Marcus said. "Me too," Amelia added. The marshal looked at her. "Girl, you don't need to—" "Yes, I do. Those people are my family. They need to see that somebody came back. They need to see that somebody cared." The marshal studied her for a moment. Then he nodded. "All right, but you stay behind us. This could get ugly." They gave Amelia and Marcus horses. Amelia had never ridden before, but she learned fast. The group rode south toward Thornhill Plantation. It took most of the day. As they got closer, Amelia's heart started pounding. She didn't know what they would find. She didn't know if anyone was still alive. She didn't know if Cyrus had punished the others for her escape. They reached the plantation just before sunset. The place looked exactly as she remembered. The big white house on the hill, the small shacks behind it, the fields stretching out in every direction. Smoke rose from the chimneys. People were still there. Marshal Clayton raised his hand. Everyone stopped. "Spread out. Surround the property. Nobody leaves until I say so." The men moved into position, creating a perimeter around the entire plantation. There would be no escape for Thomas Thornhill or Cyrus Gan. Not this time. The marshal rode up to the main house with 6 deputies behind him. Amelia and Marcus stayed back, but close enough to see. Thomas Thornhill stepped out onto the porch. He was a large man with a red face and gray hair. He held a glass of whiskey in one hand. He looked at the marshal and smiled. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" "I'm Federal Marshal Clayton. I'm here to investigate reports of illegal enslavement on this property." Thornhill's smile didn't move. "I don't know what you're talking about. I run a farm here. My workers are paid employees." "Is that so? Then you won't mind if I speak with them." "Not at all. But you're wasting your time." The marshal dismounted and walked toward the shacks behind the main house. Amelia followed at a distance. Her heart was beating so hard she thought it might break through her chest. The people were gathering outside now. They had heard the horses. They had seen the men with guns and badges. They stood in a group, silent, afraid. Amelia saw faces she knew. Ruth was there. She looked older, thinner, but alive. Ruth saw Amelia and her eyes went wide. The marshal stepped forward. "My name is Marshal Clayton. I'm a federal officer. I need to ask you all some questions. Are you being held here against your will?" Nobody spoke. They looked at each other. They looked at Thornhill standing on his porch. They looked at Cyrus Gan, who had appeared from somewhere with his rifle. "Are you free to leave whenever you want?" the marshal asked. Still silence. "Are you paid for your work?" Nothing. Amelia couldn't take it anymore. She stepped forward. "They're scared," she said loudly. "They're scared because if they tell the truth, they'll be punished. They've been punished their whole lives for telling the truth." She walked toward the group. Ruth reached out and grabbed her hand. "Amelia," Ruth whispered. "Child, what are you doing?" "What I should have done a long time ago." Amelia turned to face Marshal Clayton. "These people have been enslaved here since before I was born. Mr. Thornhill's father started it. He kept us hidden. He told us the war never ended. He told us we were still property. He beat us. He worked us. He killed people who tried to run." She took a breath. "I'm only 12 years old, and I've seen 6 people murdered here. 6 people buried in unmarked graves in those woods." The marshal's face went pale. "That's a lie," Thornhill shouted from the porch. "That girl is a liar and a thief. She ran away, and now she's trying to cause trouble." "If it's a lie," Amelia said, "then why did you send dogs to kill me? Why did Cyrus Gan hunt me like an animal? Why do these people have scars on their backs from whips?" She turned to Ruth. "Show him." Ruth hesitated, and slowly she turned around and lifted the back of her shirt. Her back was covered in thick, raised scars. Old ones and new ones, years of beatings carved into her skin. One by one, others turned and showed their backs. Men, women, even children. All marked, all broken. Marshal Clayton's hands balled into fists. "Mr. Thornhill," he said quietly, "you're under arrest. For what? These people work for me. For illegal enslavement? For kidnapping? For murder? and for violating the 13th Amendment of the United States Constitution. Thornhill threw his whiskey glass. It shattered on the porch steps. You can't do this. This is my property. These are human beings. The marshal interrupted. And they're free. They've been free since 1865. And you've been breaking federal law for 30 years. He nodded to his deputies. Arrest him. And arrest that overseer too. Cyrus Gan tried to run. He didn't make it 10 feet before 2 soldiers tackled him to the ground. Thornhill was dragged off his porch in handcuffs. He screamed and cursed the whole way. The people from the shacks watched in stunned silence. Then someone started crying. Then someone else. Then everyone. They weren't sad tears. There was something else. Relief, disbelief, fear, joy, all mixed together. Ruth pulled Amelia into her arms and held her tight. You came back? Ruth whispered. You came back for us. I promised myself I would, Amelia said. If I made it, if I survived, I'd come back. The marshal approached them. Miss, I'm going to need statements from everyone here. It's going to take time, but I promise you, justice will be served. These men will face trial, and all of you will be compensated for what was done to you. We don't want money, Ruth said. We want to be left alone to live our lives. You'll get that too. I give you my word. Over the next 3 days, the marshal and his men documented everything. They took statements. They found the graves in the woods. 6 bodies, just like Amelia had said. They collected evidence. They arrested 3 more men who had helped Thornhill maintain his illegal operation. The people of Thornhill Plantation were given 2 choices. They could stay and work the land as free people with ownership rights, or they could leave and go wherever they wanted. Most chose to stay. It was the only home they had ever known. But now, it would be theirs. Samuel helped them set up a council to govern themselves. He helped them file the legal paperwork to claim ownership of the land. He helped them understand what freedom actually meant. Amelia chose to stay too, not at Thornhill. She couldn't live there anymore. Too many ghosts, too many memories. But she stayed at New Hope. Clara and her husband took her in. They treated her like a daughter. Marcus stayed too. He and Amelia became close friends. He taught her to read. She learned fast. Within 6 months, she could read better than most adults. She read everything she could find. Books, newspapers, legal documents. She wanted to understand the world. She wanted to make sure no one could ever lie to her again. Thomas Thornhill's trial took place 8 months later. Amelia testified. So did Ruth. So did 12 other people from the plantation. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Thornhill was sentenced to 20 years in prison. He died there after 18 months. Heart attack. Cyrus Gan got 15 years. He served 12 before being released. He disappeared after that. Nobody knew where he went. Nobody cared. The 3 Rottweilers were never found. Some people said they ran wild in the woods. Others said they were put down. Amelia never asked. She didn't want to know. 5 years after her escape, Amelia stood on the porch of her own small house in New Hope. She was 17 now, taller, stronger. The scars on her feet had faded but never disappeared. She wore them as reminders. Ruth lived 2 houses down. She was older now, but healthier. She smiled more. She had started a small garden and spent her days tending it. She said it felt good to grow something for herself instead of someone else. Marcus had married a woman from the settlement. They had a baby boy. Marcus worked as a carpenter and helped build new houses as more people arrived. New Hope was growing. Amelia worked as a teacher. She taught children to read and write. She taught them their rights. She taught them their history. She made sure they knew what had been done to their grandparents and great-grandparents. She made sure they knew what freedom cost. One evening, a young girl came to her after class. "Miss Amelia," the girl said, "is it true you ran from dogs?" "It's true." "Were you scared?" Amelia knelt down to look the girl in the eyes. "I was terrified, every second. But I ran anyway. You want to know why?" The girl nodded. "Because being scared don't mean you can't be brave. Being scared just means you're still alive. And as long as you're alive, you can choose. You can choose to give up, or you can choose to keep going. I chose to keep going. And that's what made all the difference. The girl smiled and ran off to join her friends. Amelia watched her go. She thought about that night 5 years ago. The dogs, the darkness, the terror. She thought about the choice she made, the choice that changed everything. She thought about the 42 people who were finally free because one 12-year-old girl decided she would rather die running than live in chains. She thought about all the people who would never know their names, all the people who ran and didn't make it, all the people who died believing freedom was just a lie. And she made herself a promise, the same promise she made every day, to remember them, to honor them, to make sure their suffering meant something, to make sure it never happened again. The sun set over New Hope. Smoke rose from chimneys. Children played in the streets. People sat on their porches and talked and laughed. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. But it was theirs. And it was free. And that was everything. Freedom is not given. It is taken. It is fought for. It is earned with blood and pain and sacrifice. But once you have it, once you truly understand what it means, you can never go back. You can never unsee the truth. You can never unknow that you have the right to choose your own path. The greatest weapon against oppression is not violence. It is the refusal to accept the lie, the refusal to believe you are less than human, the refusal to accept that your chains are permanent. Amelia was 12 years old when she learned this lesson. She was small and weak and afraid. But she had something her captors could never take away: the knowledge that she deserved better and the courage to act on it. That courage saved 43 lives, including her own. And it proved something that tyrants have always feared: that one person, armed with nothing but truth and determination, can break a system built on lies. Amelia ran into darkness, not knowing if she would survive. But she ran toward light, toward freedom, toward hope. And she made it, not because she was special, but because she refused to accept that she wasn't. The story of Thornhill Plantation stands as a dark reminder of how oppression can persist even after laws change, how systems of control can continue in hidden corners, protected by isolation and enforced ignorance. How justice requires not just laws on paper, but people willing to fight for them. In slave quarters throughout the South after the Civil War, there were likely other places like Thornhill, other plantations where freedom was deliberately withheld, other people who died never knowing they had been legally free for years. Amelia's story is remarkable, not because she was extraordinary, but because she was ordinary. A 12-year-old girl with no resources, no training, no advantages. Just determination and the belief that she deserved better. That's what makes her story powerful. It proves that resistance doesn't require superpowers or special abilities. It requires only the refusal to accept injustice. Today, more than 130 years later, Amelia's story still echoes. It reminds us that freedom is never permanent, that it must be defended, that silence in the face of injustice makes us complicit. It reminds us that the most dangerous oppression is the kind that operates in darkness, away from scrutiny, protected by the assumption that such things couldn't possibly still happen. And it reminds us that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply refuse to accept the lie. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the courage it takes to stand against injustice, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. Share it with someone who needs to know that resistance is possible, even when everything seems hopeless. Subscribe to our channel for more forgotten chapters of American history. Stories of people who refused to stay silent, who fought against impossible odds, who changed the world not with weapons or wealth, but with courage and determination. Leave a like if you believe Amelia's story deserves to be remembered. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done in her situation? Would you have run? Would you have stayed? Would you have come back? History doesn't give us easy answers, but it gives us stories like Amelia's. Stories that force us to ask ourselves what we would do when faced with impossible choices. Stories that remind us that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. Stories that prove that freedom, once tasted, can never be forgotten. Thank you for watching. And remember,